right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Huff, CPA with DW Huff Consulting, bringing you the July 18th, 2025 edition of News from the Front Lines of Business. So, so here we are, made it through another week here, it looks like, for most of us. And as usual, we got a bunch of observations and client conversations to share with you, and kind of jump right in. So based on some chats we've had, we always try to share stuff that is useful to everybody, and something that's come up. So now we're kind of looking in more depth at the Big Beautiful Act, sort of One Big Beautiful Act bill or whatever. I know we got to think of a better acronym for that to shorten it, but anyway, that's what it is. So, so we see that charitable deduction. So when you look at most of the news coverage of this, they'll point out that whether you itemize or not, you're going to be able to benefit from some amount of a charitable deduction. So the way it is now, the above the line deduction, if you're married filing joint, is going to be $2,000 and $1,000 if you're single. So this is nice because ordinarily, we talked in the past about how the standard deduction is, it's over $30,000 now if you're married filing jointly. So for the typical person who gives, a couple $1,000s a year to a church and different things like that, there was no real benefit to making those contributions. So this act kind of fixes that. But we'll also note that there's some other further restrictions for the people who do itemize. So for the people who contribute enough, and where their overall tax situation is such that they are using the Schedule A to itemize, there's some further limitations. So now we see here, might make it a little bit, there's this floor here. So 0.5, so less, half a percent there of whatever your adjusted gross income is, they're going to subtract from the itemized deductions. And if you're in the highest tax bracket, they're going to limit you to 35% of what you contribute. So I didn't look at the formula to see if the normal limitation that goes above and beyond all this, which is the 50% of gross income, is still in play. I believe it is. So now we have but now we got some additional restrictions for the high earners and for everybody else that are going to be thrown into the mix there. So it seems like there's going to be some updates on the forms and instructions in a little bit to clarify that a little bit further. But so but at the end of the day, for the people who don't itemize, they'll get a benefit, but everybody else, there'll be some additional calculations for the people who do tax work to see what you're going to get to deduct. All right, capital gains tax savings using a like-kind exchange. So this comes up frequently, mostly in a case where we're talking about a rental property or something like that, and you may have held it for a long time and you want to sell it, and the capital gains can be, depending on which tax bracket you're in, it could be anywhere between no tax capital gains all the way up to possibly 20%. So people like to avoid that, particularly if they're going to take that the proceeds and just buy another rental property or some other like kind property. So the general rules of a like kind exchange are: you sell a property, you got 45 days to identify what you want to purchase next, and then 180 days to close on that transaction. So we've got some time limits that we got to be conscious of. But another thing to be aware of is the fact that we have to use a qualified intermediary. So the reason why this comes up is a lot of times, February or March of the following year, we're working on taxes. Somebody sold something, they got something they want to buy, but they received the proceeds themselves. All right, so they made a sale, they received the money, or paid off the loan or whatever, and now they want to, like kind of exchange. Well, that can't happen. So whenever you've actually took constructive receipt of that money, the like kind of exchange is now off the table. So it's kind of important to know that we got to use this qualified intermediary. So as always, I tell everybody to kind of reach out to me ahead of time before you do these things, so I can kind of walk you through the deadlines and details. But this is something that happens pretty regularly. I find that people think they're going to go ahead and make the the transaction and exchange it, and didn't set up the qualified intermediary. So we've done this with a few people in the past, and there's some fees involved. It's not terrible, but expect that of your proceeds, if you're going to go with this method here to defer to gain, that you're going to have another $1,500 or so worth of legal fees for this intermediary, because they gotta take proceeds, and then when you identify the property, basically you tell them what property you've identified, and when it comes time to sell, or in this case, this is an example from one of the companies that we use, this DST type of investment. So it could be a DST or it could be just another property, but the third party intermediary is now going to take that money and disperse it on your behalf to whoever you're purchasing the next investment from. So pretty important to make sure we kind of follow those steps, because it's we always kind of recommend that everybody talk to us before they do any kind of major transaction. And this is a perfect example, because it seems like at least once a year it happens where somebody intends to do a like-kind exchange and didn't follow the steps on the front end, and it doesn't work. So yeah, and there are some ways to reckon, and just as a side note, there is a way to kind of salvage some of that problem with these opportunity zone funds. So it's not, I guess, completely dead, but yeah, if you do it wrong, we're gonna have some complications that we have to kind of talk about to figure out the best possible solution of a lot of bad solutions. So as always, talk to us before you do anything. On a financial note here, S&P 500. So taking a look at things today as I was just making some decisions and stuff that we do on the financial planning side of things. Notice that the S&P is up about 7.8% year to date. So pretty good year, I guess you'd say, particularly when you consider how things started out a little bit rough. But this heat map chart, this is something that is provided by my custodian for all my funds here. And what it basically does is it kind of weights everything by size. So the green colors you see here represent the stocks that are up. Everything that has this reddish tint to it is things that are down. And it kind of corresponds with how much of an effect each one of these companies had on the S&P for the year. So what jumped out at me as I'm kind of looking at things, NVDA, that's NVIDIA, big big IT type technology type company. AAP, also Apple, another one, it's phones, but I consider that to be technology as well. Microsoft, Meta, Google, two different Googles going on here. Oracle is another big chunk there. Tesla, even though it's a car company, I consider that to be tech based. So when we look at the overall return, you could probably pinpoint 10 stocks in here that if it weren't for their inclusion in this index, it would be a completely different, much smaller picture here. So this is this chart here. The heat map is it accounts for the size of the company as well as the amount of the increase. So yeah, so you get down to this smaller sections here, and you can't even make out the names. They have such a negligible effect on the overall index. And really, if you probably really were counting it up, there's probably 30 here that really drive everything. It's like everything else can't really. There's a diversification effect, and definitely they contribute to things. But one thing to be careful of, I guess, as we've seen this scenario has played out in the past, where technology has a lot of impact on the overall return. And when the technology dries up, that things tend to kind of stagnate. So, interesting observation. All right, so my closing thoughts for the week here. Tour de France, is in full, full on here. So we're not quite halfway through. We're past the 13th stage here, so we're a good ways through it. That ends up where I think we're a little bit over 1,200 miles of total racing, and I don't know how well you can see with the gap here. So these guys have been racing a long time, and still got a ways to go. But the gap, over 1,200 miles. Between first and second is this 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Next guy is 7 minutes back, and it gets a little bit tighter after that. But the difference between first and second is a pretty big jump. But it's still pretty amazing when you think about the fact that the length of the race so far, and is this Tadej Pogačar, who's leading it, is definitely considered to be it's always considered to be the favorite for the year, I believe. But the fact that he's opened up a 4-minute gain on the next closest guy, and then 8 minutes and everywhere else back there. When as strong as it is, if I was just looking at it, and if I had to estimate, I would expect to see a 20 or 30 minute gap at least, and it's just a few minutes. So this shows how good these guys are and the level of fitness that they have to complete this event. So That's some observation video. Keep watching it if you're not already. It's very interesting. Scenery is nice when you look at the coverage of when you can watch some live coverage. Some of that stuff through the French countryside is really breathtaking as far as scenery goes. So with that, we're done for the week, and we'll see you out here next week.